Happy Friday, DawgNation. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger. Busy show for us. Jeff Sintel is on the way, and yes, we will have him officially as a guest, not because he's calling in, but because we pre-recorded it yesterday. But the good news is there is a lot of really good stuff we'll cover with Jeff, the two recruits, commits that Georgia got this week, but also some of that chatter going back to last weekend for all the folks who have been on campus and everything that had been going on around that. So we'll do all of that with Jeff Sintel on today's show. That's going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to begin today with Dan Mullen being asked about all of those media types who apparently fell in love with Georgia during the offseason. At least that's the tale being told by a reporter close to the Florida program. Dan Mullen gives a somewhat interesting answer to that, which I think total hypocrisy, and we'll call Dan Mullen out for that today. Georgia quarterback JT Daniels also said something very interesting, too, and we will use that as a springboard to talk about the start of Georgia practices. So there is a lot going on. Busy around the SEC as well. We'll cover all of that for you. Glad to have you with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger. It begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
You know, sometimes we take our role seriously here as a little bit of a watchdog when coaches say things that are not true. I do feel like I have the, or at least when it's at least hypocritical, maybe. Hypocritical is a better thing than completely untrue. I feel like it's my obligation to point that out. Sometimes it feels like we end up doing a lot of that kind of stuff for Florida coach Dan Mullen, and we'll do some of that again today. Georgia fans will want to pay very close attention to the question that Mullen was asked yesterday and the answer that he gave. Let me set the stage for you this way. Programs all across the SEC and college football are beginning their summer camps, the start of practices that will eventually lead to the beginning of the season. Georgia getting going here at the end of this week. We'll get a chance to hear very soon, heading through the weekend, from Georgia coach Kirby Smart and some of the Georgia players there. That's going to be really fun. Florida did all of this tap dance yesterday. And longtime Florida reporter Pat Dooley, now retired from the Gainesville Sun, but a guy who's been close to the Gators program for quite some time, got a chance to ask Mullen yesterday about what Dooley sees as a lot of hype around Georgia here this offseason and what that means to a Florida team that did win the SEC East a year ago. And Dan Mullen, in his answer, well, he just pretends he hadn't heard a word of this, and that's not been the kind of thing that he's interested in whatsoever. I think I've got some nits to pick with both the question and the answer, but let me let you hear it first, and then we'll kind of get into it after that. Let me let you hear Pat Dooley talking to Dan Mullen.
Do you think that this team will come in with a little bit of a chip on his shoulder because everybody is, so fell in love with Georgia this summer, and they're not getting a lot of love in the preseason?
Yeah, I don't know that they notice that. I think it's an edge of their competitiveness as a team. I don't know. I don't ask our guys. I don't pay much attention to that stuff, to be honest with you. But I like looking at that of the edge of our team and where that are and the competitiveness of our guys. So I don't know a chip on our shoulder about that, but I think a chip on their shoulder, the edge of just kind of edgy on who they are and the type of team that they want to become, that they have that chip on their shoulder to want to go compete and be a championship team.
This is a jerky thing to do because, as I say frequently, words are sometimes hard, and I use the wrong words frequently. But you hear Mullen's like, I'm just interested in the team and the edge of the team and where that are. It's like there's a little bit of a grammatical thing in there from Dan Mullen that I think needs to be pointed out, where the edge of our team are right now as we head towards the upcoming season, I believe Mullen says. But beyond that, the thing that I find very interesting about Dan Mullen there is this notion of, are people picking Georgia? I didn't see that. I don't pay much attention to that kind of stuff. That's the biggest crock of malarkey I've ever heard, because Dan Mullen made all kinds of headlines at SEC Media Days a couple of weeks ago showing you how much he does pay attention to this kind of stuff. And listen, you can be the kind of coach that listens to everything and uses that as fuel of motivation, or you can be the kind of coach that truly doesn't seem to care about the media at all and doesn't pay attention to any kind of that stuff whatsoever. I think there are ways to be a successful coach that has big-time rabbit ears, that's listening to everything that's being said, and the kind of coach that just locks the door in your office and only worries about what you got to do. But what you can't be is one thing while you pretend to be something else. You can't be one of these guys that apparently is listening to everything at the same time while you pretend that you're somehow floating above that, transcending the idea of preseason predictions and anything like that. And so what Dan Mullen says, I don't know how our team is responding to Georgia being picked to win the SEC East because I don't pay attention to that kind of stuff. But if you want to go back to a couple of weeks ago, I'll show you this on the screen. Orlando Sentinel reporter Edgar Thompson asked Dan Mullen at SEC Media Days what he thought about Georgia being the team to beat in the SEC East. He says, well, hold on. Didn't they say that last year? And you can insert your own corny laugh line there when it comes to Dan Mullen on that. In other words, saying, well, I thought they were picking Florida to win the SEC East a year ago. Now, we told you when Mullen said that back in July that what he said was erroneous, that Florida was heaped with praise a year ago, commonly picked to win the SEC East by many, many people. So factually, Dan Mullen was incorrect to say a bunch of people were picking Georgia a year ago, but he's also factually incorrect, I would say, once again, when he acts like, well, I don't pay attention to predictions, when he tried to use predictions as fuel for his team back at SEC Media Days back in July. So this is Dan Mullen kind of really getting it wrong on both sides of that, showing himself to be a hypocrite in one side of his mouth, pretending that he doesn't care about preseason predictions, and in the other side of his mouth back in July, bringing up the notion of preseason predictions as a way of, I guess, motivating his team or patting himself on the back or whatever he was doing with that. But even beyond all of this, let's go back to the question that was asked by the longtime Florida reporter about, as Dooley says there, everybody fell in love with Georgia over the course of the offseason. Now, we're going to talk more about this in a moment with a question that JT Daniels recently faced there as well. And, let's be very honest right now about Georgia offseason hype. I mean, does it really exist all that much? Now, yes, the media did predict Georgia to win the SEC East, but that is just what I said it was. That's a prediction. That's not some sort of level of hype to say Georgia can win the SEC East, because that is what Georgia has mostly done. Now, they didn't win the SEC East last year, and there are maybe some reasons as to why, but ultimately the results on the field matter. Florida won the SEC East. Georgia didn't. So a year ago, Florida did that. But you can't pretend like the history of the world started last November. The fact is, in 2017 and 2018, 2019, Georgia did win this division, including, important head-to-head wins against Florida in 2018, 2019 that made that so. So the media picking Georgia in the SEC East isn't some unfounded hot take. It's just simply saying the thing that has mostly happened the last few years that didn't happen a year ago, we actually think it reverts back to form this year and Georgia wins the division once again. That's not some crazy prediction to say that a Florida team that scraped away a division win but also lost 4 times in the process might not come back and perform at the same level again this year. That's not some crazy hot take. That's actually a fairly, common prediction to give. But beyond winning the division, I mean, who out there is really predicting Georgia to do much more than that? Have you seen that? And listen, I pay attention to this kind of stuff very frequently. Maybe I've missed something, but I don't believe I have. Is there any loud media voice with a significant following? Is there anyone who's kind of gone out there and said, yes, we think Georgia's going to do more than win the division. We think they're going to win the SEC. I mean, Georgia did get 50-something votes at SEC Media Days to do that, but I haven't really heard a prominent voice make that case. We haven't heard, at least that I know of, any prominent voice that's picked Georgia to win the national championship as of yet. Most people acknowledge they're on their short list of contenders. They'll be a preseason top 4, top 5 team, something along those lines. But in terms of the kind of recognizable faces that you see on TV, have we heard any of them actually pick Georgia to win the national championship? It might happen. I don't think we've heard it yet. So I think the most important thing to identify and discuss when it comes to preseason, offseason hype for Georgia is it doesn't really exist in large measure. We said this when Kirby Smart appeared at SEC Media Days, and we may see this when Kirby Smart speaks to the media here locally as Georgia gets ready to start its summer practices. This whole, line of thought of, if not now, when for Georgia? When are they going to win a national championship? When are they going to get over that hump? The fact is, Kirby Smart didn't take a lot of questions like that at SEC Media Days. That just wasn't a big part of the chatter that he dealt with there. So right now what you see is a fairly, tepid appraisal of Georgia during this offseason. Good enough to win the SEC East, and it seems like almost anybody with any significant following beyond that is taking a wait-and-see approach of, let's see exactly how this team looks on the field before we go proclaiming them to do anything beyond winning the SEC East, which at this point in time is not an unreasonable goal for a program like UGA. And if anything, I'd say what Florida and Georgia are both playing for a little bit this year, although Dan Mullen doesn't acknowledge that, is that part of the reason why Florida's not getting any offseason hype whatsoever, not even picked to be in the preseason top 25, according to guys like Phil Steele, is because in and around beating Georgia a year ago, and listen, I'm a Dog fan and a Gator hater, but you got to give Florida credit. They did win that game. But in and around that, we didn't see much from Florida last year. Embarrassing bowl loss to Oklahoma, and Mullen can try to explain that away if he wants to, but it did happen, and in comparison to Georgia winning its bowl game against Cincinnati, that's probably a little bit of an edge in favor of Georgia. But, playing close to Alabama, that kind of, moral victory just doesn't get you a whole lot. That what Florida's actually playing for this offseason is to propel themselves back into the offseason conversation next year, right? I mean, that's what this season's really about. That folks saw Florida break through, win the SEC East, but really not be a real threat to do anything much beyond that. And I think a lot of the media that's ignoring Florida, I think they'd probably say we're kind of ignoring them with good reason because they showed last year that they may be capable of beating a down Georgia that's got injuries and quarterback issues and things like that, but they don't really compare very favorably to the very best teams in the country. Oklahoma dragged them up and down the field for the bowl game. And to a degree, I think that's maybe certainly slightly less true for Georgia, but there is also a version of that that's true for UGA there as well. That, as I've said before, the only thing worse than getting a bunch of off-season hype is the moment when that off-season hype sort of stops. And you stop getting those questions of, when are you going to get a national championship? When are you going to break through and be back in the college football playoff? At a certain point in time, the media, they stop asking those questions because they've sort of decided in their mind that it's no longer relevant to even wonder about that because, time has passed and it just hasn't regenerated the way that it did in 2017. So Georgia's kind of playing for some of that a little bit there too. So the bottom line is actually for Georgia and Florida right now, either one, there's actually not really all that much hype. But if a team like Georgia can go out there and beat up on the Gators the way we think they're supposed to on October the 30th, then maybe at that point in time, Georgia sets itself up to truly be considered the national championship contender that not many people are giving voice to them being right now. And the team that wins that game in the cocktail party later on this year kind of justifies being a relevant voice in the conversation, both at the end of the season and maybe in future years there as well. And not just one of those kind of flash in the pans that's good enough to win a division, but ultimately not much else. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. And glad to have you with us no matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. We're glad to see you however you watch us on video, including those of you that check us out right there, top of the page, above the fold at DawgNation.com. What a great way that is to display our show on video. Very accessible for those of you who are kind of already going to DawgNation.com anyway. That's a really cool thing to be able to do. And, of course, these kinds of things, whether it be making the show available on video or what we do on podcast, which, by the way, Monday, episode number 1500 of our show. I'm really excited about that. All of the ways in which we do all of this made possible for our great sponsors, including our friends at Kroger here today. And I told you this last week, and it's really true. I've gotten so many people reaching out to me to say, BA, I have found so many of the school supplies that I need right there at my local Kroger. And that's a great thing to be able to hear because, let's face it, you get those lists from your class for your children, and you're trying to figure out what all this kind of stuff is. And the good news is Kroger's kind of a one-stop shop for all that. They got 8+ deals on everything you might need for both what goes in the backpack, what goes, in the lunchbox, the snacks, and everything else. You get all of that at Kroger, and you can check them out online for more on that. It's Kroger.com/school. Kroger.com/school. You can find out a lot more about that today. Great to have them as part of the program. Great to have you with us here as well. Coming up in a couple of minutes, we'll talk to Jeff Sintel, get all kinds of UGA recruiting updates with him as we go on the road assisted by AAA. Phone issue persists, so we did pre-record this with Jeff yesterday, but I think you're going to really like it. A really good breakdown of Dylan Bell, the wide receiver commit from this week, and Griffin Scroggs, the offensive line commit from this week. Also a lot of breakdown of guys that, have made some news as of late. Jaheim Singletary decommitting from Ohio State, Ernest Green, the offensive lineman from California, taking a visit to UGA. We'll find out from Jeff all about where all of that stands here coming up in just a moment. But before we get to that, though, I do want to go around the doghouse here today, which is delivered by my friends at Marco's Pizza. And I want to build on the theme that I was just talking about a moment ago. That there's this, I think, perception out there, and, certain media folks seem to be pushing this, that there's somehow this huge level of hype around Georgia. As we said before, you have a hard time actually identifying it, although some media members seem to think it exists. I'll give you another example of this. Marty Smith is an ESPN personality. Many of you are aware of him, and he and his partner, is it Ryan McGee, whatever the McGee dude's name is, they were interviewing JT Daniels at SEC Media Days. Now, Marty asked JT about the supposed hype that exists around UGA. I don't think the question is great, but I think that JT Daniels gives a terrific answer. And my reason for playing this is, and another portion of the interview, JT kind of goes into some personal details about his, mental health and kind of the challenges of dealing with an injury that just kind of lingered probably a little longer than he wanted it to. That's worth hearing and reading. You should seek out the interview and find it. I'll put a link that was shared on social media so you can see that for yourself. Our buddy Mike Griffith has also written about this at DawgNation.com too. But I'm going to focus on the on-field part of this here for a moment, because I think the answer that Daniels gives about what's true about Georgia, what's also true about one of Georgia's top rivals for a national championship, and the work that UGA needs to do to distinguish itself from the other top national championship contenders, I think this is a really thoughtful answer from JT. And as we get ready to begin, practices for Georgia here this week, rolling through the rest of the summer, heading towards September 4th in the opener against Clemson. The words from your starting quarterback here, I think, carry a lot of weight. I think it's a little bit of an odd question from Marty Smith, but a great answer from JT Daniels. Take a listen to this.
People who analyze the Southeastern Conference every day have massive expectations for the Georgia Bulldogs every year. We hear it every single year. This is Georgia's year. That refrain is very common right now, entering the 2021 season as well. What do you believe your ceiling is as a team?
We have the talent to do whatever we want. We have a bunch of things. Like, we have the pieces that we need. It's on us to execute. But, Alabama has the talent to do whatever they want. There are a lot of teams that have the capabilities to win a national championship. What we have that is a separator for us is we have so many guys, and I'm just going to speak in terms of offense. We have so many guys. We have, almost a whole receiving corps is ones, twos, threes, can all step on the field and are talented enough and mentally ready enough to play right now. That doesn't happen very often. We have 5 running backs that if they're in the game, I don't think twice. They know their protections. They know their run assignments. We have 3 deep of linemen, 5 or 6 tight ends. If they're in the game, doesn't matter which one of them, I trust them.
There is a line of thought that JT Daniels explores in that question that I think is really, really important. And the fact that Daniels, being a player on this team, that he's thinking this way, I think that's probably a pretty good thing for Georgia. Here's the line of thought that I think you got to consider here for a moment. Daniels essentially says that, yes, we have gobs and gobs of talent, but so do the other teams that we're competing with. Week 1 against Clemson, maybe an SEC championship against Alabama. Those kinds of teams have gobs and gobs of talent there as well. So there's a word that Daniels uses that I think carries a lot of weight. He says, so here's what's going to be our separator. He uses the word separator. In other words, here is the thing that we're going to do that's hopefully going to distinguish us from the rest of the talented teams in the country. Now, I might somewhat squabble with the notion of it's the overwhelming amount of depth for Georgia that's going to be the separator there, because the truth is, Clemson, Alabama, they have great depth there as well. As we've said on the show before, that what Daniels describes is all the potential that exists on the Georgia roster. Long list of guys at the wide receiver position, the potential they possess. Long list of guys at the tight end position, the potential they possess. Same thing on, all across the board, deep running back, things like that. And as we've said, the story for Georgia this summer heading to the start of the season, what you hope you see in Charlotte against Clemson, is that long list of potential breakout guys. From that, a handful of guys truly emerge as your top-end performers. You got to sift through the potential to find the performers. And if you ask me what's the separator for Georgia going to be, if that separator does emerge, that to me is it. That from a roster filled with potential, some true high-end performers are truly identified. So we may squabble with what the separator for Georgia is, but the fact that Daniels is even thinking that way, I think that carries a lot of value and a lot of weight. That's a pretty thoughtful guy at your quarterback position. And as I've gotten to know JT Daniels a little bit, and admittedly, I guess I probably had a perception of him from the state of California as kind of a guy that went to kind of a fancy high school and goes to USC and has a lot of hype around him. It's not that I thought he would be a bad guy, but I guess I was never fully prepared for just how much I would grow to like Daniels off the field, as much as I've obviously found plenty of reasons to like him on the field. When Daniels talks, I find myself kind of perking up, ready to listen to what he has to say, because he seems to have a pretty thoughtful way of analyzing what's going on with himself, what's going on with the rest of his team, and maybe even the rest of college football there as well. So good stuff from your Georgia quarterback as the Dogs get ready to begin their practices here and boy, that September 4th game against Clemson really looms in a very big way. That is Around the Doghouse. It's delivered today by our friends at Marco's Pizza. And one of the cool things I like about Marco's Pizza is, they have all kinds of variety choices for you, whether it's the traditional kinds of pizza or those specialty pizzas made in-house that have some really, really cool options and combinations. Plus, they have really cool menu items like the pizza bowl for those of you that maybe don't want the crust, that you kind of like the idea of, hey, maybe either going without the carbs or you have a dietary restriction, whatever else. That's one of the things that Marco's Pizza can provide for you there as well. They're just really creative about the ways in which they put their item together, plus their menu items together. Plus, you're talking about, delicious pizza, melty cheese on top of, real authentic Italian crust. It's just one of the things. I just love Marco's Pizza for those reasons. Plus, great savings there as well as you head towards the weekend. Keep this in mind. Right now, you can get a large one-topping pizza for just $9.99. That's incredible savings. Large one-topping pizza for just $9.99. You can go to the Marco's app. You should download that if you haven't, or check out marcos.com today. You can get set up for the weekend with our friends at Marco's Pizza, because pizza lovers get it. All right, it's great to have you with us here today. It is DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. When we are done, before we're done, long list of SEC news that I want to give you an update on. Plus, a little bit of good news for a former Dog still in college and a former Dog trying to make his way in the NFL. We'll give you all of that. But for now, everything related to UGA recruiting, the two big commits the Dogs got this week and possibly what could be coming next after that, plus some key updates on some very big names. Let's get it all from Jeff Sintel. This is pre-recorded, but it is great. On the road, assisted by AAA. Good to have you all with us as well. And we're going to do a very special edition of our On the Road with Jeff Sintel here tonight, presented by AAA. I say tonight because I'm actually recording this on a Thursday night. We've had a little bit of a phone issue in our DawgNation World Headquarters studios, so Jeff Sintel, good enough to pre-record a conversation for us right now, and it's apropos because Jeff actually is on the road. Jeff, I've got so much I want to talk to you about, but let's begin right there. We saw on Twitter from you on Thursday, getting a chance to be in Raven County, seeing some of Gunnar Stockton's practice, and really a good-looking ball coming out of that young man's hand as he gets ready to begin his senior season. What did you see from Stockton today? And no doubt the folks up there in the beautiful mountains of North Georgia are ready for the start of the upcoming year, and obviously Stockton going to be a big part of that. How did you experience him here today?
I guess we got to say we're going to see the best of Gunnar Stockton. Brandon, I know everybody's embracing the health kick, getting into their fine fall season form, but get this. Gunnar says he feels a little bit stronger. He's squatting more than he ever has before. He's done yoga. He's worked on that core really well. I got one for you. He's about 6'1", about 215. Pretty good fighting weight there for him. He feels better than he ever has before. And I think Coach J-Bo Shaw here at Raven County, I'm actually in his office right now. He said, look, he had a little bit of crystal ball. He said he wouldn't surprise him at all if Gunnar Stockton threw the ball for 70 yards in the air in a game this high school season. Of course, they opened the year with I call the new Wintersville in the state of Georgia. That would be Jefferson and the Dragons on August the 20th. Currently, there's no TV, no national TV or any kind of TV for that game. You want to talk about Georgia's hopes and dreams for the future on August the 20th. You're going to have Malachi Starks on one side and Gunnar Stockton on the other. The big thing with Gunnar, and it's much like it was last year with Brock Vandegrift, is his football career is going to have a big hole in it and be incomplete if he can't get that state championship. I mean, for him, there's a lot of fascinating storylines, Brandon, with Gunnar that, came to my mind when I was up here. If he has he has the average Gunnar Stockton season, which would win you a fantasy football league with a lot of the stats from a quarterback. He's going to show up on all the Georgia high school records and probably smash several Georgia high school records, including some held by current number 1 draft pick Trevor Lawrence. That's what's all in front of Gunnar Stockton this year.
I think we look back on the week that was for Georgia, you see a lot of commits, right? It was a very busy week for UGA recruiting, and the most recent of those was Griffin Scroggs, the offensive lineman at Grayson High School. I had a chance on my program Wednesday, SEC Country Live, to talk to Willie Anderson, the great former Auburn offensive lineman, many-time Pro Bowler, who's also been a personal tutor of Scroggs. And, Jeff, I know you've done a lot of reporting on this. It's very interesting to watch the way in which Griffin Scroggs has emerged as a player. And what Willie Anderson said on Wednesday was He thinks a lot of this would have actually happened for him a year ago had there not been COVID, had there been camps. He would have had a chance to show that. But no doubt, physically, Scruggs, who's always been tall, who's always been, above that 300-pound number, is actually now a mean, lean version of a low 300 number as opposed to maybe the 335 or whatever he was, way back years ago. And it is certainly an inspiring story to see somebody who, as has been explained to me, loved the University of Georgia, work hard to get on UGA's radar, get the offer, accept that offer. Jeff, those are the kinds of stories that I love celebrating. And I can't pretend that I don't care about 4-star this and 5-star that. Obviously, that's the kind of stuff I ask you about all the time. But I've also got a little room on my shelf for guys who love UGA, make it a life's ambition to get a scholarship from this program and then get a chance to do just that. That sounds pretty good to my ears as well.
Brent, I'm a sucker for a really good story. And I'm also a sucker for somebody that tells me something I've never heard before in my career. And, you got a 310-pound scuba diver coming on the way to the University of Georgia. Griffin Scruggs, he's like, somebody throws his state championship ring off the boat 100, 125, 150 feet down. He can go down there and get it. Now, does that make you a good football player? It makes you the ability to control your breath, measure your breaths, have very good fitness level, have a very good wind. Those are all things that will translate to the game of football. And I like what this kind of reinforces what Willie said. That's great having him on there because Willie's a guy that really knows what we're talking about. I mean, he's probably one of the greatest 4 or 5 offensive linemen in Cincinnati Bengals history, much less Auburn. But with Griffin was very interesting about how this is what we thought would happen out of COVID, Brandon. We thought there's going to be some players that are too good for where they wind up because nobody got the chance to see them. And luckily for Griffin Scruggs, he got the chance to be seen and evaluated a lot. And now he's a Georgia Bulldog.
We've got more coming up with Jeff Sintel in just a moment. I want to remind you before that, though, we are on the road assisted by AAA. You think about AAA for legendary roadside assistance, but they can also help you prevent life from being complicated when it comes to one of the most important things to consider, and that is life insurance. AAA's financial service associate can help you simplify things when it comes to your life insurance. You can call 866-695-0222. I'll give you that number one more time. It's 866-695-0222. You can also stop in and speak to somebody in your local AAA office or check out this website, AAA.com/life, for a lot more information on that and find out the ways in which AAA can help you when it comes to your life insurance. Of course, AAA Life Insurance Company is licensed in all states except for New York. Life insurance is underwritten by AAA Life Insurance Company in Livonia, Michigan, and products and features may vary by state. It is on the road, assisted by AAA with Jeff Sintel. And let's get back to our conversation right now. Dylan Bell, also another commit from Georgia this weekend, to Georgia this weekend, over the course of this week. Let me just make sure I say this accurately. 3-star receiver out of the state of Texas. Jeff, we are in an age right now in which a 3-star receiver like A.D. Mitchell has gotten a lot of buzz from the Georgia program throughout the spring. One of the big performers on G-Day, and really a guy that a lot of folks have a lot of thoughts that might be a big contributor during the season here this year there as well. But when you think about Bell, do you make the comparison to A.D. Mitchell? Or for those of us who have had to work pretty quickly to get acquainted with Bell, what do you think of him as a player, and what exactly is Georgia getting there in the person of Dylan Bell?
Yeah, a lot of folks are going to ring that bell for 3-star and 4-star, especially when it comes to Dylan. But, his film is I guess I won't say misleading, but you can't really get a really good read on Dylan Bell because most of his film, he's at a private school in Texas. They were kind of like the mythical private school state champion in Texas last year. There wasn't an official state championship game, but they went 7-0. And Brandon, largely he made all those plays as a running back. He had 18 touchdowns as a running back. And I think the sky really is undetermined there for Dylan Bell, and that's a good thing. If someone want to start throwing out player comparisons, I would think, somewhere between, Karis Jackson land is a good place to start. He's going to be big, Brandon. He's going to be very thick and explosive. Kind of hard to get on the ground, 210 pounds, really long reach. And I think really the whole world, Georgia got a chance to see him several times, Brandon. And I can tell you what, there are a lot of 4-stars that wanted to be Georgia Bulldogs that are higher rated. They didn't have that committable offer that Georgia didn't want to take. And they did want to bring Dylan Bell into the program. So I think, this is one of those things where you just got to trust the staff here in terms of finding the guys. and they think Dylan Bell is a lot better than some of those more highly rated names that everybody was thinking about.
All right, so let's bounce through a few issues here, try to cover a lot of ground quickly. How big is the Jaheim Singletary decommitment from Ohio State? How big is that for Georgia? I mean, you hear other schools mentioned as well. Miami comes to mind. But what does it mean for Georgia that Singletary is back on the open market?
I think it just makes it, Instagram official for all you folks out there that are very cosmopolitan and like to flaunt your worlds on social media. I think now that he's broken up with Ohio State, I don't really think Ohio State's a contender anymore. And for the longest time, Brandon, I say on the forum, and I've said a couple of times that it was probably one of the worst kept secrets on the recruiting trail, that Jaheim Singletary was likely going to come down to Georgia or Miami and not Ohio State. I think now it's out in the open. I think he's going to be much more open about taking his visits and making his visits. I think Georgia's a good fit for Jaheim Singletary in the long run. It'd be interesting to see what happens there. South Florida ties aren't as big because he's from Jacksonville, Brandon. I think that's a big point that a lot of folks need to remember. The way Georgia's recruiting a lot of those Florida DBs is pretty strong in this 2022 cycle. And I think Singletary would be a good fit for Georgia.
How much did it matter that they were able to get Kamari Wilson back on campus this past weekend, the 5-star safety from IMG Academy?
Brennan, you had to love it because I know you like to start looking through those pictures. And it's one thing for a kid to say, I had a family feel, but it's another thing to bring the family with you. And that's what Kamari Wilson had. I mean, I think it's everybody in the photo album that almost showed up in Athens. You saw those playful pictures he had with Will Muschamp. We've been hearing that Will Muschamp has been a difference maker, an impact recruiter in that Kamari Wilson. He was there, Brandon, on June the 1st. He came back, gotten really cozy with Georgia. You hear a lot of the recruits in the class point to him as the guy that has to be part of this class. And I think with what Georgia's going to do, turning over the safety position, the way Georgia's recruited him, Georgia's pedigree for defensive backs, I'm going to say this, Brandon, he's going to be the number one guy on the top targets list until he makes his decision. That's how important he is for Georgia.
The 4-star offensive lineman Ernest Green from California was in town. Is that a real thing? How much of a real player is Georgia for Green right now?
I think Georgia, let's you got baseball on your mind, Brandon. You're a big Braves fan. I think Georgia was already on first base with the recruiting relationship through Eddie Gordon and Matt Luke. The young man did his homework. He knew about Georgia getting guys drafted in the league and how Georgia's putting offensive linemen in the league. They were on first base. Now he just took that visit. He was there for the cookout, the dog days of summer. I think Georgia's on second base. I think Ohio State probably is sitting on third base right now, and I think Georgia has to do a little catch-up there. But I think what happens for Georgia is they need to get that official visit, and then they have a real shot there for Ernest Green. Really going to be hard for Georgia to bring in a lineman of Ernest Green's caliber, but there's some strong ties there to Ohio State. But what's that everybody says in the recruiting world, Brandon? Shooters got to shoot, and Georgia's definitely going to shoot for Ernest Green.
I hate to be negative on what's usually a fun Friday with us. We're going on the road with you, assisted by AAA, but it's also at least someone interesting who wasn't there. You know, Luther Burden, the 5-star receiver. That's kind of one of those pie-in-the-sky dreams for me. I'd love to have a player of that caliber in this class. You got to try to find something a little bit more tangible to believe that's going to take place. Maybe this weekend would have been an opportunity for that, but he's not there. I guess you should also point out that Walter Nolan, I believe, was at Texas. You can correct me if I'm wrong on this. I believe at Texas A&M this weekend.
Correct.
What did you make of the guys that weren't in Athens this past weekend on what turned out to be a very busy weekend of recruiting?
Yeah, I know a lot of guys in the business will trot out those Luther Burden stories because you can say number one wide receiver and you can get some energy off that. I don't know, but here's what I think. When Georgia has 1,000-yard receiver or has a receiver putting up those type of numbers through October, I think that's when they become a serious player for Luther Burden and not before. I think that goes hand in hand with what everybody's goals are for Georgia's season. Georgia's got to end up with one of those big boy defensive tackles, Brandon, whether it's Travis Shaw, Walter Nolan, Big Bear Alexander, and you can even throw the name Hero Canoe in that mix now, Brandon. I don't know if you know the name Hero Canoe yet, but it's a really, really interesting story. Georgia's going to get an official visit. That's a certainty. This is a young man that grew up in Germany as a soccer player. You got some Nigerian roots there. And, 6'5", 295, Brennan. I think he can play everything from a 0 tech all the way up to a 5 tech. That's how versatile he is. uncommon agility. Brandon, he used to be a goalkeeper. And when he was playing soccer in Germany, now he's in California. I think, Brandon, he's going to be 17. He's just going to be 17 years of old when he enrolls early at some school in January. I think the defensive tackles are going to be a constant source of conversation between us two friends right here on your Friday program. I want to ask you something though, Brandon. If I could have waved the magic wand and put any of those names that were absent from the cookout, and you could have put them there in Athens having a great visit, who would you have wanted to have there?
I'd go Burden 1 and then probably Nolan 2. And, between Nolan and Shaw, I guess I don't quite know which one I should think is the better between the two. I don't know that I have a fully formed opinion on that. So I'd say Burden would have been my number 1, and that elite defensive tackle, whether it be Nolan or Shaw, and I guess it probably would be Nolan. That'd be my number 2 name on the list.
I just think the degree of difficulty with the pull there with Oklahoma, especially with Oklahoma trending to the SEC, that also makes it very hard. In my mind, Brandon, I think, I'm curious. I don't know whether you like that 5-star flavor, but for me, I think the name is probably Andre Green Jr. If you're going to get that wide receiver and check that box with a big time talented wide receiver, I think that was Andre. I don't think that's as big a deal that he wasn't at Georgia, because he never said he was going to Georgia. He did wind up with his longtime favorite Clemson. He was able to check out Clemson recently as well, but I think that's really important, the wide receiver. I mean, you need to start speaking names into existence, Brandon, and start polishing that off, man. And whichever one you want to speak into existence, I think it might be on the offensive side of the ball rather than the defensive side of the ball.
Jeff, I like that. Great stuff. And we'll certainly try to do our part to speak that into existence. Thanks for being here on the road, assisted by AAA, as you join us from Raven County. Have a great weekend. We'll look forward to speaking to you back here again on our program very soon again as well.
Yeah, lots of stories. We're going to have Gunnar Stockton. We got Justice Haynes.
Wow.
I'm going to be tonight, actually, at the big Buford versus Cedar Grove scrimmage game. Folks, that's a hog molly slobber knocker of a – doesn't count for anything. Starters get 1 quarter and rotators get in there as well.
Are there any college prospects in either of those two teams, Jeff, that we should know about?
I'm going to sit there and go, who's not a college prospect?
Right.
And that's going to be a lot easier. C.J. Madden just named his top 5. You got Jake Pope. Guys, Georgia fans need to start thinking about that name, Jake Pope, a little bit too.
That's right.
I know he shows up on our list as well, but Cedar Grove, Buford, man, Friday football is here in the state of Georgia.
Wolves and Saints on a Friday night. That sounds like a pretty good way to do it. Jeff, thanks for being here on the road, assisted by AAA. We'll look forward to talking to you soon.
Thanks, buddy. Have a good weekend.
All right, good stuff there from Jeff Sintel on the road, assisted by AAA. Let's do our SEC through.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
By the way, speaking of high school football, which you heard from Jeff Sintel right there, you may see this from our friends at Score Atlanta. Our buddy I.J. Rosenberg and the entire team there partnering once again with Peachtree TV for a great slate of high school football this fall. And you may hear it said, let me be the first to tell you that I am looking forward to being a part of those broadcasts, at least a big part of those, along with a huge host of other folks as we bring high school football to you later on this fall. More to come on that, but you'll hear some about this. So let me go ahead and say I am very, very excited to be back a part of the high school football scene here on the TV front in the Atlanta area in the state of Georgia here this fall, working with our friends at Score Atlanta and Peachtree TV. Great slate of games coming up, and I can't wait to tell you more about that as we get a little closer. But there's some chatter starting to take place around that, so let me be the first to say, really looking forward to being a big part of the high school football community here later on this fall. Before we do our SEC through, let me also remind you about our friends at College Ave, who can really help you with one of the most important things that so many folks are thinking about this time of year, and that's figuring out how do you pay for college, especially some of those last-minute expenses. Obviously, at times that can be a huge challenge, and that's where College Ave can really step up here because they offer private student loans that can help cover all the expenses and help make sure that you get your college experience paid for, which is a very important thing there. They have competitive interest rates, flexible repayment plans, and great customer service. And, of course, a quick, stress-free application takes just 3 minutes. So it's very, very easy to get set up and find out all about what your interest rate was going to be, what your repayment plan is going to be, really get all the information that you need. Website's on your screen if you're watching on video, but I'll tell you more about it. It's collegeave.com. That's AVE, collegeave.com. And you can find out more about how the folks from College Ave are helping you when it comes to paying for college. Make sure you check that out today. As far as our SEC through stuff goes, a little more fun to make of Dan Mullen today, if you don't mind. So there's a big-time offensive line recruit, at least pretty big time in the state of Florida, named Leighton Nelson. And up until recently, Nelson has been a commit to the Florida Gators. Well, guess what? That's no longer true. Nelson flipped his commitment. Now, listen, with all due respect, if you're an SEC fan, here's the thing that you never want to hear. That our number one offensive line recruit just flipped away from us, and he flipped to UCF. But in this particular case, that's what happened. And the quote here from Nelson is pretty damning all the way around about telling Dan Mullen and John Hevesy, the offensive line coach, that he wasn't coming to Florida. Here's what Nelson says, and if I could take a bath in this quote, I would. It says, it was pretty tough, especially given the phone call before my commitment. Like Coach Hevesy and Dan Mullen have been, listen to this, he says, they've been spamming my phone, and they were getting like a little defensive about it. A little defensive about the offensive lineman flipping from Florida to UCF, the Golden Knights there. He says, I can understand that. So it's kind of hard to deny that. But all in all, I think UCF, for the majority of recruiting, deserves just excited about the future. Talks about Herb Hand, Gus Malzahn, but says Dan Mullen and the Florida offensive line coach John Hevesy were spamming his phone and got defensive when he told him he was decommitting. That's pretty entertaining stuff all the way around. On a more serious note, Florida coach Dan Mullen has also talked about what I think is one of the stranger stories of this offseason, where things stand with Bretton Cox. You may remember that Cox at one point in time had a very cryptic tweet about being, the best pass rusher in college football in 2022, and a lot of folks kind of took that and ran with that, and basically tried to report on the basis of that social media post alone that Cox was out for the upcoming season. In fact, when I would mention this, I'd have people in the comment section telling me, well, BA, you didn't hear? Bretton Cox is out for the year. And what I'd always say in response to that is, no, that's not true. That's just what some, Nimrod ran with, but that's not the actual facts. Cox did deal with an injury, but he is back at practice in a somewhat limited capacity for Florida right now. This is kind of a strange story because there was never really a lot of, follow-up on whatever the weirdness that had come out of the Bretton Cox story to begin with. But what Mullen said this week about practice was that he's going to be out there practicing right away and trying to build him up. Right now, the time he's missed, building him up, getting him back ready to being 100%. It's not just a foot injury, but it's training, conditioning, and all that stuff. I expect big things out of him. And listen, I don't deny that Bretton Cox is supposed to be a big part of the Florida offense, but I should say Florida defense, but if I'm a Gators fan, hearing about conditioning stuff and not just recovering from injury, but also getting into playing shape to be that guy coming off the edge, you better believe I'm paying pretty close attention to that if I am a Florida fan. Also, update from the Arkansas side of things when it comes to KJ Jefferson. Sam Pittman kind of talking him up right now. That's the likely Arkansas starting quarterback. Pittman not outright naming him as the starter, but certainly identifying him as someone who leads in that quarterback competition right now. Now, Jefferson is nowhere near as well known as the starter for Arkansas a year ago, Felipe Franks. Franks obviously played actually pretty well, as we thought he might, working with Kendall Browse a year ago. Jefferson, by comparison, is not as well known, but he was a former four-star recruit coming out of high school. He's out of the state of Mississippi. And Jefferson did play last year near the end of the year against Missouri. He was only 18 of 33. That's just 50-something%. But he did throw for 274 yards, and he threw for 3 touchdowns in that game. My reason for bringing up Jefferson here in this context and Sam Pittman talking about him is that Arkansas is one of the more experienced teams in the SEC right now, bringing back a lot of returning production, a lot of returning starters. They did lose a big wide receiver to Oklahoma, so that's an important part of the offseason evaluation of the Hogs. But this is a team that just kind of brings back a lot. And one of the things you're left to wonder is, well, what's the new quarterback going to look like in place of Felipe Franks? Franks gave the Razorbacks a chance to win some games a year ago. A little bit of confident talk from Sam Pittman when it comes to Jefferson here, who he's not naming as the starter at the moment, but calling him the number one guy in that room. And I think there'll be a lot of eyes on, especially for gamblers, people who care about season win totals and point spreads and things like that. Finding a capable quarterback for a team that's got a lot of experience in most other places, that could be pretty interesting for Arkansas here. A couple of other SEC through stories I want to get to for just a moment. So Steve Sarkisian has said something. Now, he said it in the context of, Texas remaining in the Big 12, but SEC fans are going to hear this stuff. They're just going to roll their eyes because I think in the SEC this is much less true. So what Sarkisian said was that he's very comfortable with the idea that Texas is going to be every team's biggest game. Now, he said this in light of, being lame ducks in the Big 12 and the fact that I'm sure most of the other Big 12 schools, in fact, we don't have to guess this, they've been fairly open in saying this, they're pretty irritated with Texas and Oklahoma, and they had plenty of reasons to hate Texas as it was. So what Sarkisian said was that he was comfortable knowing that the Longhorns were the biggest game for every team they play. But here's the thing I also hope he's comfortable with, and hope Longhorns fans themselves are comfortable with this. That may be true in the pillow soft Big 12, where they carry a lot more weight and throw a lot more weight around than they will here in the SEC. But I think one of the things that may disappoint Texas fans is the idea when they come into the SEC, they are no longer everyone's biggest game. They may be Arkansas's biggest game, they may be Texas A&M's biggest game, and they may be Oklahoma's biggest game. That quartet of schools right from the farthest west version of the SEC, they'll all treat each other as a very big deal. But Texas coming into Athens is no different than Alabama coming into Athens, or no different than going to Jacksonville and play Florida. SEC teams are used to playing a lot of teams that have bullseyes on their back, and Texas to the average SEC fan does not stick out from the crowd any more than any of the other, high-level programs in the league do. Now, listen, will there be a lot of buzz around Texas and there are a lot of SEC fans looking to take them down a peg? Yeah, that's true. But this notion that Texas casts a bigger shadow than the other programs in this league, I think Steve Sarkisian deep down knows that's not true, having been in Alabama's offensive coordinator, but important to mention that, nonetheless. Brian Harsin, the Auburn coach, has also talked about his new wide receiver, Demetrius Robertson, saying that, he has been at Auburn. He's been going through the paces there, but I guess they're still trying to dot some I's and cross some T's when it comes to the academic stuff and getting him back out there practicing. They expect that to happen sooner rather than later. As we told you many times before, Auburn is pretty thin at the receiver position here this year, and so I'm fairly curious to see if Demetrius Robertson can find success at Auburn that he never found at UGA. Obviously, these summer practices are a big part of that, and getting him up to speed quickly, getting him on the practice field as quick as possible is going to go a long way towards determining just how successful he can be in that. And Brian Harsin says he's almost there, but not quite there as of yet. One more SEC through story I want to get to here for just a moment. I thought it was interesting that Jimmy Callaway, the Tennessee wide receiver, was asked about the four different quarterbacks who are competing to be starter at Tennessee right now. You got Brian Maurer, you got Harrison Bailey, you got Hendon Hooker, the former Virginia Tech quarterback, Joe Milton, the former Michigan quarterback, and Callaway was kind of giving you one of those kind of coach speak, player speak type answers, but then he did let it slip that he felt like the ball that Milton threw was completely different than what anybody else throws. He felt like that there was just more zip on that ball that Milton threw. Obviously, Milton, a pretty high-profile, former very hyped quarterback at Michigan, and at least in this one particular case, at least one Tennessee wide receiver says what he sees coming out of Milton's hands, the ball that Milton throws, is just different than the rest of the guys. I still say that if I was, Josh Heupel, I'd probably try to build my offense around somebody who's been there, someone more like Harrison Bailey. But interesting to hear Callaway speak up on Joe Milton there. We'll make that your SEC through. I'm going to give you a couple of updates here on a couple of Georgia things, at least slightly Georgia notes in a moment. Before that, though, let me once again give a shout out to my friends at the Finish Long Drink. I love what the Finish Long Drink brings to the table, especially as you head towards the weekend. You're talking about a ready-to-drink cocktail. Listen, the last thing I want to do when I'm getting ready to enjoy my weekend is to also have to play bartender. Like, I love bartenders. I'm just not a very good one myself when it comes to mixing my own cocktails. That's why the Finish Long Drink makes all of that irrelevant. I don't have to worry about that. It's ready to drink right out of the can. You pop the top, you can take a sip, you can pour it into a glass, you can do whatever you want, whether it's the Long Drink Strong, the Long Drink Cranberry, Long Drink Zero, the original that kind of comes with that like grapefruit flavor and the gin kick. This is a fun thing to enjoy as you head towards the weekend. So if you haven't tried it yet, so many of you have, and you've been good enough to tell us when you do, but if you haven't tried it yet, find them online, thelongdrink.com. That's thelongdrink.com, and you can find out golf course, beverage store, bar, wherever you're frequenting this weekend. You can find out which ones have it, and you can check some of that out today. Make sure you try the Finish Long Drink. So a couple of quick notes here before we wrap things up. Rod Carey is the head coach at Temple, and this week he is officially named former Georgia quarterback and starter week 1 against Arkansas. You'll remember that. Dwan Mathis, who transferred up to Philly to play for the Owls. Carey, the Temple coach, has named Dwan Mathis his starting quarterback. So I obviously wish DeJuan well. Most of you do there too, and it seems like for now things are going well. Getting a chance to be starting quarterback there for an FBS level program in the American Athletic Conference, and we'll see if the experience that he earned last year for Georgia helps him perform at that level for Temple. So congratulations to DeJuan Mathis for getting the nod there as starting quarterback at Temple. This had pretty much been named, I guess, back in the spring there as well, but the head coach did make it official this week, so I guess do with that what you will. And then last night, I didn't see the Hall of Fame game. I was watching the Braves last night. But I did see on social media this morning that former Georgia wide receiver Tyler Simmons caught a touchdown pass in the game, and ironically, he caught it from Joshua Dobbs, the former Tennessee quarterback who's also from Alpharetta, Georgia. So happy to see Simmons still giving it a go there and loving the idea of getting some play for what he did in a preseason game. So he'll be forever on sides in the mind of Georgia fans, and we'll never forget that. And last night he was also in the end zone as well in that game for the Steelers and the Cowboys. So pretty good stuff. Congratulations to Tyler Simmons. I can't play you the NFL highlight on the show here because if I do, Roger Goodell will have me thrown under the jail. But if you go to like the NFL stuff on Twitter, like you can watch, if you just want to see the touchdown, like I think NFL Network tweeted out the touchdown pass itself, so you can watch that. Tyler Simmons, great job by him, and Joshua Dobbs, who threw the pass there as well. So with that, let's wrap things up on a Friday. So I told you yesterday as we do our Gator Hater roll call that I'm a sucker for nostalgia, especially when it comes to old T-shirts from the 80s and the kind of cartoon drawings that were on them, and y'all are always good to respond to that kind of thing. And so I showed you a cool one yesterday. Let me show you a really cool one today. This is Bark-A-Lot on Twitter, at MKDCheedog on Twitter, saying, here's one of my T-shirts from the 1985 Georgia-Florida game. Now, the 85 Georgia-Florida game is a pretty special one because I believe that was the day that Georgia beat a highly favored Florida team, 24-3. Florida, I believe, may have been number one at the time of that game. If I've got some of the facts wrong on that, don't ruin a good story by correcting my errors. The point is, though, how about this, picture on this T-shirt? World's largest cocktail party, Georgia versus Florida. I love how fancy the dog and Gator are dressed up. They got their tuxedos on. I love everything about this, Bark-A-Lot. Thanks so much for sharing that. How about a Gator Hater countdown to say goodbye on a Friday? 85 days from right now, Dogs get some revenge against the Gators. We'll see you Monday, show number 1500, DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. Talk to you then, everybody. And on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews cool down. Of course, R.S. Andrews, we tell you all the time, you can turn to them for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. Also, if your water heater goes out, in many cases, R.S. Andrews can replace that for you the same day. But you got to find them online at rsandrews.com, and they will do that for you. All right, we will get a few comments here. Let's do Facebook first. We'll do some YouTubes after that. And hope everybody's just getting ready for a really fun weekend. Of course, it's always a great pleasure to be with all of you. Probably won't go crazy long on the comments, but as some of you say, even when I say that, we have a tendency to still do that. So let's see how this goes. I'm all fixed, so we'll just use that. Michael's got this really cool new app that has a way of combine. Michael Carvel, our producer, it combines all the comments. Eventually, I may do that because the one thing that does do for you is it prevents any kind of what y'all would describe as bias. However, I do kind of like knowing who's commenting where, and you can tell by the logo who's commenting on this, where they're coming from. But yeah, this may be one of those things where old habits die hard, but eventually we will maybe combine these comments into one place. For now, let me just kind of show some love over here. Keith Folds does validate my, statement a moment ago that Florida was number one when we crushed them in 1985. I was there. Keith, that's a great game to have been at. Really good stuff. Remind me, is it Keith Henderson who makes a big play in that game? Henderson was on that 85 team, right? This is 85 is just a little bit young for me. I have much better memories from 86 on. 85 is fuzzy. I remember the big deal of Georgia winning the game. I don't remember a lot of the specifics as to why. I seem to remember Keith Henderson doing something. I remember there's a big interception in the game. I was in the third grade in 85. My teacher was a huge Georgia fan, and I remember her being very, very happy the next Monday after Georgia won that game. I remember having been very happy about it too, but a lot of the specific details from the game I don't quite remember. And I don't know that I've ever seen that on ESPN Classic or SEC Network or something like that. That'd be a good one to re-show right there. That'd be a very good one. Matt Rugavina says my Texas A&M friends are convinced they've got Big Bear. Can we have a Billy Lucci versus Mike Griffith segment? Boy, I don't know. I don't know there's enough internet bandwidth for Billy Lucci versus Mike Griffith. That might get pretty interesting all the way around. I mean, listen, I understand why they think they've got Big Bear. I understand that, but I guess we'll see how it plays out. Kyle Cummings says bold prediction: 2,000-yard receivers this year. That's pretty cool to see. Daniel Aldrich says I'm just a young, and yeah, I guess so. I think I have premature gray hair. I think that makes me seem older than maybe I am. It's one of those things. So when I was in my 20s, I'll be self-serving for a moment. So when I was in my 20s, somebody told me something that I wish I would have taken seriously. And I'm the kind of guy that I'm just sort of a natural. Like, I don't, like, what you see is what you get, right? I don't do a lot of, primping and, whatever else. But somebody did tell me that, hey, when you're in your 20s, especially if you want to be on TV and do things like that, you should go ahead and start coloring your hair. And is it like Propecia? Is that the thing that makes your hair, not fall out? Whatever it is, he said you should start doing that now while you don't need it, because when you get into your 30s or you start getting into your 40s, and at that point in time, you will need it. But if you make those changes then, people will just sort of notice. I mean, I'm going to call out two people here pretty quickly. Jimbo Fisher and LeBron James, two very different people. I'm not quite so sure that Jimbo and LeBron are mentioned the same sentences fairly frequently. But y'all, go back and look over the years. Jimbo Fisher's got a lot more hair than he once did, and LeBron James does too. That when you do this kind of thing, people just sort of notice. But if you do it in your 20s when you don't need it, people, by the time you actually do need it, you've been doing it so long that nobody really notices the difference. And like a lot of advice you get in your 20s, I didn't quite pay attention to that, but I almost kind of wish that I would have. Anyway, the point here is, I have probably more gray hair than a person in his early 40s would. Bill Sanders says he graduated from college in 85. I got to tell you, though, I'm super jealous of that era around the UGA campus. Is it the Hargett Library that sometimes tweets out those fashion photos, or just what campus life was like back in the 70s or the 80s? I think it's the Hargett Library that does that kind of stuff. And I always think that Athens and the University of Georgia in particular, in like that mid-80s era, it just seems like a really fun time to be on campus. Not to say that it's not fun now, but when I was coming of age, I sort of always kind of felt like the people who were like a little bit older than me, like there was just kind of a cool vibe, 70s, 80s. I don't know. To me, that seems like it would have been a great time to be a student at UGA. Let's see what else. Epic Robinson always makes me laugh. Brian Lindsay says, what area do you cover high school football? So we're going all across the state. I'm lucky enough to be doing some play-by-play again. This is something I used to do many years ago and had kind of wanted to do again. And I've worked with Score Atlanta before and looking forward to that partnership with Score Atlanta and Peachtree TV here this year. We're going to tell you a lot more about this in the days to come, but it's starting to kind of leak out that that's going to happen. So I wanted to make sure I tell all of you, really, really excited to be a part of those broadcasts, doing play-by-play. We've got a great schedule. I don't think it's for me to tell you all the games right now, but trust me when I tell you, some names that you care about are going to be on our screen for these games later on this year. It is going to be so much fun. Going to be so much fun. Hugh Nash says he predicts on September 4th the Bear leaves Texas hibernation. I like the idea of that. Jacob O'Neill says he wasn't even thought of being born yet in 1985. Yeah, it's kind of nice to have all generations represented. Those who are a little older than me, those who are a little younger than me. I like the whole thing. Jamie Huff says we would skip school to go chill at UGA on the every day back in the or a day each year back in the 80s. And to me, that seems really, really fun. Really, really fun. George Herndon says that Nick Saban colors his hair. He calls him Satan instead of Saban. Yeah, you can tell when Saban's gotten a fresh coat of paint. I mean, I always kind of joke, especially with my buddy Mike Johnson, who played for Nick Saban, Alabama, that you can tell it's a big game when Saban's got that fresh coat of paint on his hair. You can also kind of tell when it starts to fade a little bit and when he kind of needs some. Saban's also kind of got like the back comb thing going, and there's a certain kind of placement that Saban does to make it seem like he's got a full head of hair. But if any of that hair slides in any direction, you can kind of tell that things aren't quite what they first appear to be. I sort of think Saban's a little more into some of that grooming stuff than you might actually realize. Saban comes across as like Mr. Football, and that's all he cares about. I sort of feel like Saban spends a little bit more time in front of the mirror than you might realize. I've kind of noticed that. Let's see what else. Jermaine King, sorry to hear that you missed the show, but I'm glad you're at least here right now. Santi Arnold says, I graduated in 93. Sorry, but the Ray Goff years were hard to deal with. Yeah, I understand where you're coming from on that. I mean, first of all, 92 was pretty fun, although there were a couple of heartbreaking losses. The Tennessee game in 92, that's one of the most painful games of my childhood. I was a sophomore in high school, I think, in 92. Very, very painful loss, and one that I greatly remember from that era. Georgia had every chance in the world to win that game and could have won the East had they. Just, really, really painful all the way around. But I do think about that, though. Like, because this is actually, I didn't graduate from Georgia, but this is about my era. Like, I graduated high school in 95. So for people who are just a little older than me, like, if you're graduating Georgia from 95, like 93, 94, 95, 95 wasn't a losing season, but it was not a, it wasn't a great year either. I mean, you had about the 3 worst years of Georgia football in like the last 40 years, 93, 94, 95. That's about it. Donovan's first year, 96, wasn't great either, although there were a couple of cool games involved in that. The Auburn overtime win in Jordan-Hare Stadium is an example. Like that stretch from like 93 through 96, man, that's tough, right? If that's your college years, and a lot of my friends, that kind of was their college years, that's pretty disappointing. Now, Donovan had a great year, too, in 97, and Goff had a, pretty good year, I would say fun year in 92. But in between that 92 and 97, that was a tough run there for a while. So those are your college years. That hurts you. That hurts you a little bit. Let's see what else. Devin Loper says, y'all talked last night about Gunner, but when was the last time we started a freshman quarterback? Well, via injury, Jake Fromm started in 2017, and Jacob Eason started before that. I don't know. I wouldn't put Gunner Stockton in the inside track to start for UGA in 2022. This is a little bit different kind of program, but in 2016 and 2017, Georgia used starting freshman quarterbacks in back-to-back years. Jamie Huff says, could you imagine Garrison Hurst in this offense? No, I really can't. And I think that Hurst is on the list of underrated SEC players for sure. I mean, Garrison Hurst should have won the 92 Heisman. I've said that a million times. And, Herschel Walker was so good at Georgia that he just sort of sucks the life out of some of the other conversations around other players. That when you got the guy who I think rightly was the greatest player of all time, although not honored that way, as he should have been a couple of years ago, but Herschel was so good, and the distance between Herschel and the next best player is so wide that I think you forget that there are players other than Herschel Walker very much worthy of remembering and recognizing at Georgia. And a guy like Hurst, who was AP Player of the Year, and he had some real accolades there as well. Clearly a first-round draft pick that he should have been honored for what he did there for UGA. Some of y'all give me a hard time for not being on YouTube, and here I am looking at it and seeing it. Bank 6 enjoying the idea that somebody committed to Gus Malzahn instead of Florida. Very funny stuff. Jay Shipe says, will I be shocked when Ole Miss wins more games than A&M? I absolutely will be shocked if that happens. I don't believe it will take place. But, Jay, you've been very clear in saying that during the offseason. I'll give you some credit for that. And your question of will I remain in denial if that's the case? No, I mean, the one thing that I hope that you can appreciate is if I'm wrong about this, I think that Jimbo Fisher and Texas A&M are well ahead of where I think Ole Miss is right now. Way better set up for a very good season. I've predicted A&M to be something in the neighborhood of 11-1 and runner-up in the SEC West. I am more than happy to give credit to anybody else who has said otherwise if I turn out to be wrong. I mean, listen, I shoot my mouth off all the time, but hopefully I'm pretty good about taking my medicine if I get it wrong. Jay Shipe says I smell a bet coming on. I don't know that I have anything to bet with. But I'll certainly put my pride and reputation on the line. Brian McPhail says, do you think Georgia has a shot for Arch Manning? I would say, Georgia's in the running for that. But I guess as of right now, I don't quite consider Georgia to be among the leaders. Frank Patterson says, I wish they would have to move Ole Miss to the East just so BA would have to deal with talking about Lane for a week each season. So here's the thing. I know that I have this reputation of being someone who hates Lane Kiffin. The truth is, I just don't believe him as a head coach. If you want to go back and listen to old audio from when he was offensive coordinator at Alabama, I actually said a lot of positive things about Kiffin at the time. I thought that Lane Kiffin was the single person most responsible for the transformation that occurred at Alabama around that time. So I respect Lane Kiffin as a play caller. I think that Lane Kiffin, though, is overhyped as a head coach. I think the media likes him because he's gives off the air of being interesting. And once again, if you gamble, if you care about that kind of stuff, there is definitely, I think, an opportunity on the other side of Lane Kiffin, because I think people have confused a level of social media charisma with someone who's actually set up to succeed as a head coach, and I don't believe that Lane Kiffin is. First of all, there are two sides of the ball. There's offense and defense, and while Kiffin and Ole Miss score plenty of points, I don't think there's any evidence whatsoever they're going to play much in the way of defense. And so that's kind of where some of that comes from for me. Let's see what else. Brady Pest Management says the Gator fans have officially turned on Mullen 8-4. I love to hear that, Matt. That's fun to think about all the way around right there. Taylor Lord asked about what happened to Jackson Harris. That's a really good question. I'm not sure what he is up to these days. It is kind of interesting to see that, some former players kind of, move into the business world and they end up being very successful there, kind of well away from football. I always like to watch how these guys develop in their life after football. It's fun to think about the ways in which the football program can really be a springboard for that kind of thing. A few more comments. Thomas Van Santa says he'll bet me that golden shoe. You think I'm going to put this golden shoe? This golden shoe's like the Iron Throne on Game of Thrones. I'm not getting rid of this thing at all anytime soon. At all. By the way, Jeb Blazevich, who Paul Moon mentions, that's a guy that, we did some work with Jeb. He did a couple of post-game shows with us, and now he's living out of state. I forget which state he's in, but he's I think doing well in business and making his way in the world. These guys, upon the completion of their careers, are really just like anybody else. And I've talked to enough of these former players to understand that they're trying to figure out what they're going to do for money. And for some of them, the NFL is an option, but it's amazing how many of these guys go through that process to say, okay, how many years am I going to give it? Because, listen, the NFL rosters are huge, right? 53 men on 32 different teams. Not everybody's a first-round pick, second-round pick. There's a lot of guys who make the league as undrafted picks, and in some cases it takes them a couple of years to do that. And it's always interesting to listen to the deliberations that are going on in the players' minds of, how many years do I give it before I, what's the line from the movie Moneyball, or maybe it's in the book as well. I just know it from the movie about, giving up the kid's game. At what point in time does somebody tap me on the shoulder and say, okay, you can no longer play the child's game anymore, the kid's game anymore? And, football is one of those things of, hey, if you can stay in the game, make some money, that's great, but you can't waste, a bunch of years on that dream at the expense of not being able to fund your life some other way. And so, the parallel thoughts that a lot of these players have to go through post-Georgia of, okay, I'm going to try to make it in football because obviously the financial rewards for doing that are great, and plus you love the game probably. But simultaneous to that, you have to have a pretty significant plan B there too. It's a real consideration that a lot of these guys spend a lot of time considering. DMart42 says Lane Kiffin was not impressive to him in person, and I'm sorry to hear that. Foster Moss worried about the Cowboys on the basis of the preseason game last night. Says a little thin in those backup ranks. I guess we'll see that. Nature Gator has got his spin on the UCF situation. Boy, that's not quite what I heard on that. I mean, I don't know if he's committed or not, but there was certainly a lot of Gator talk about that. But just listen, Nature, just do me a favor. If you bump into Dan Mullen, just tell him to stop spamming recruits. Tell him, in the words of the recruit, don't be defensive on the phone. That's not a good look. So if you just do one thing for me, just pass that along to the Florida coaching staff of recruits don't want to be spammed. They don't want defensive behavior on the telephone. That's the only thing I ask for. And obviously, I'm kidding with you. We love having you in here. Let's see what else. Jim McLaughlin says the boys did score 3 points. Was it 16-3? Was that the score last night? Like I said, I was watching the Braves last night. By the way, the Braves game, I'll say this just really fast. So my son plays 9 and 10-year-old baseball. And for anybody who's ever done 9 and 10-year-old baseball, you know that the thing that defines 9 and 10-year-old baseball is the absence of strikes, right? I mean, just like there are just no strikes. It's just you can get a player into like the right frame of mind sometimes, and he's kind of, he's throwing it in there. But, it's just very, very, it's just hard to pitch. These are young kids. It's hard to pitch. It's hard to define strikes. Not an easy thing to do. Last night, the Braves won, and the Cardinals got into a situation that reminded me so much of what we sometimes see in 9 and 10-year-old baseball, where, what the Cardinals walked like 6 in a row at one point in time. They've had awful issues with their bullpen. Walked 6 in a row, walked 4 runs in, something along those lines. And I was like, boy, I actually don't, feel so, bad as a fledgling baseball coach who sometimes, has to, work to try to find some strikes, some pitches in the strike zone when you get the St. Louis Cardinals in Major League Baseball kind of doing some of the same stuff right there. So all the way around, pretty good stuff, I guess. All right, a couple of more here for a moment. Let me go back up to Facebook. We'll get ready to go. By the way, big series tonight, if you care about Major League Baseball. Big series tonight. Philly hosts the Mets. Mets have totally imploded at the top of the National League East. Philadelphia right now seems to be maybe the best team poised to take advantage of that, but the Braves can get their shot there too, for sure. Let's see what else. On the subject of painful losses, Moose Thames mentions the 2016 Hail Mary loss to Tennessee, and that was not a good one. You almost wonder, had that game gone different, how much of the rest of the season could it have gone different, right? Following week, Georgia loses to Vanderbilt, and that was not pretty. Not too competitive in the Florida game. That wasn't pretty. Let the lead slip away against Georgia Tech. That wasn't pretty. If the Tennessee game had gone different, how different would the season have felt, right? Because like the Eason touchdown pass to Riley Ridley, crowd's going crazy. Then you have the thing, come back the other way. Georgia had shown some signs of, you're not quite so sure, because they had struggled mightily with Nichols early in the year. And so it wasn't a perfect start to the year for Georgia, but they'd beaten North Carolina. Seemed like they might get that win against Tennessee, and the entirety of the season just took a different tone, right? Maybe that's revisionist history. Maybe that wasn't actually true. But you do kind of wonder, had Georgia, batted down that pass from Dobbs and not gotten the penalty that led Tennessee to be on a short field, you kind of wonder if that could have made the entire season different. We're going to get ready to go here. Somebody mentioned Brian Herrion. That'd be a great guest to have on the show. I've always liked Brian a lot. I'd love to have him on the show. Really good idea. Really good idea. Matt Rugavine also said the Tennessee 2016 game gave Georgia motivation to go out and give them their worst loss in school history. Was that Tennessee's worst loss in school history in 2017? If I knew that, I forgot that. Harry Lloyd asked about whether or not the NCAA will continue to lose relevance as the SEC expands. And I think that is true. And I think the NCAA has kind of given up on this all the way around. I don't think that when they lost at the Supreme Court, a few weeks ago on the issue involving like academic benefits for players, and they had fought hard for that. They had fought hard to get the Supreme Court to even take the case. And then they got, basically, pasted in the courtroom after begging the Supreme Court to take the case. I think that at that point in time, the NCAA has essentially kind of given up since then. That a lot of what they do is kind of a thankless job, right? It's like everybody complains about everything all the time. And I just think they're ready for somebody else to take over the governance part of this. Plus, there is no more, for the most part, infraction oversight because, the name, image, likeness laws and rules have changed so much of that. So, yeah, I think that within the next few years, I think even hearing the words NCAA or the acronym NCAA mentioned out loud too much. I think you'll just start to hear a lot less of that because I don't think they're going to be a big part of the power structure going forward. They may continue to exist, but the kind of sports we talk about in a show like this, I don't think will largely be influenced by the NCAA. Their big, event right now is still for now the men's basketball tournament, and the College World Series has, some of that there too. But, for the most part, I think and certainly in the world of football, you're going to hear less and less about them all the way around. Randy Hall also mentioning the scrimmage tonight between Buford and Cedar Grove. But we would talk about, loaded with talent. Jeff Sintel, as he mentioned during the interview, he's going to be there tonight for that. But both those teams, and a lot of these guys are also names of interest to Georgia. The Saints and the Wolves is a pretty good deal there. All right, we're getting ready to go. Bill Kelly, glad to have you here. Even if you couldn't be here until now, we're happy that you're here for the moment. Keith Fold says, yes, Keith Henderson and Tim Worley both had over 100 yards in an 85 game. Yeah, Tim Worley, that's a guy we've had on the show many times before. One of my favorites from back then, all the way around. One of my favorites all the way around. All right, let's see what else. Johnny Lester also mentioned the 2016 Georgia Tech game. Yeah, it was a hard one for me because it was the first game I took my son to. And he's very little at the time. He's 9 now, but he was very little back then. He was excited about going to a game for the first time. And, for a while it seemed like Georgia was going to win. And, I'm trying to do the post-game show after it's over with. And you sort of think it's just going to be kind of an easy day. And, a post-game show after a Georgia win is a fairly easy thing to do, right? It's like people are in a fairly good mood. You just kind of, just sort of break it down. No harm, no foul. Everything is fine. But then when Georgia lets the game slip away and all of a sudden Georgia loses in Kirby's first year at Georgia Tech, now you got people fired up. And all of a sudden I got my son and I'm trying to watch while I'm also trying to work. I probably should not have taken him to basically taken him to work with me that day, but I wanted to take him to a game. He'd been dying to go to one, and so I was going to do that. This is back when my daughter was a baby, and so it was my wife took it as good news that she didn't have to watch 2 kids that day. So I take my son. I think it's going to be an easy day. I don't go to the press box. I watch the game from the stands. And then Georgia loses. And all of a sudden now I got to, do this post-game show with everybody fired up as they should have been. It was, a disappointing day for UGA. That's another one of those that I will kind of remember forever. That was the last time I took one of my children to a game without my wife there to help me out a little bit. So there you go on that front. All right, we're going to get ready to go for right now. Thanks for being here. Of course, make sure you check out the AJC online, AtlantaJournalConstitution.com. A lot of very important stuff in the AJC. Of course, a lot of this is getting ready for the weekend. Always one of the things the AJC does well is that weekend preview. Plus, we're thinking about getting back to school here. We talked about high school football before. Todd Holcomb's got some interesting stuff related to the GHSA, which is the governing body of the state of Georgia. Illegal recruiting going on. You may kind of remember what happened with Rush Probst there in Valdosta. Interesting stuff from Todd on that, AJC.com. Plus, getting back to high school football here right now there as well. That's a pretty interesting thing there too. Also, practice starting for the other in-state programs there as well. You can read about that. And a whole bunch of fun this weekend. As I said before, if you're a Braves fan, keep your eye on Philly, New York here this weekend too, as the National League East finally starts to get just a little bit more interesting, and the Braves maybe can kind of move past that 500 mark a little bit this weekend too. So pretty good stuff all the way around. Paul Moon, thank you for the kind words. I really appreciate that. I hope you all have a great weekend. We'll see you back here Monday, show number 1500. For DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger. Y'all, please check out R.S. Andrews there as well. Our buddy Dari back soon for Go With The Flow. Can't wait to do that. But keep that air conditioner flowing the rest of this summer there as well. Get that system tuned back up to factory fresh specs. It is just $99. You can find them online at rsandrews.com. Y'all have a great day. See you back here on Monday.